What's the first command God gave to human beings in all of history? What's the first command? I'm going to read it to you. Genesis chapter number 1, verse 27, 28. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them and said to them, have sex. That's not in your translation? You've never read that before? The first command God gave to human beings was to have sex, be fruitful, and multiply. Have sex. And then in chapter number 2, God performed the first marriage ceremony so that Adam and Eve would be in covenant with him and with one another. We know the formula. Leave, cleave, one flesh. You are, as we say, buck naked with no shame. Whoa. You see, prudes do not like the Bible. The Bible is very clear about human sexuality. It is very open, it is very plain, it is very, very vivid. And so we in our culture somehow have got this all confused, because have you noticed something happened in American culture on the way to the 21st century? Did you notice it? One of the main things is a total misunderstanding of human sexuality. Guess what? As I recently read, there are not 71 different genders. Oh, yes. There's only 2. There's only 2. And so we turn to the scripture to understand this wonderful, beautiful, sacred gift of sex and sexuality. God invented sex. He gave it to us. It is magnificent, it is glorious, and we need to understand this gift as we need to understand all of his gifts in the context of the church. We've made a serious mistake with our young people, a tragic mistake with our young people. We have brought them up in a church, and many times with Christian parents. We talk to them about being pure and celibate before they get married, and they accept that by and large. They abstain by and large. And then we spend $50,000 or $75,000 a year and send them to some college or university. And while they're there, sex is so dominant, sex is so accepted, you think that something's wrong with you if you have not had sex with the opposite sex. And therefore, they say, you know, the Bible was wrong, evidently, as I was taught, as my father and mother tried to teach me about sex, and it is a wonderful, fabulous thing. And then they have to go and listen into a secular class on, say, anthropology, and the professor said, well, there's no way they could be a God of love because of all the suffering, and they say, oh, that's it. When our kids no longer believe in God in church the way they were brought up to believe in God in church, we say, well, they're mixed up in their mind. No, first of all, there came sexual promiscuity. And then there was the theological problem. I've got to get away with the Bible and that which I'm taught. Aldous Huxley, brilliant scholar, theologian, he's very honest about it. He said, I had to come to a posture that there is no God, because if there were a God, it would interfere with my expression of my sexual life. So this is where we are. We have lost the purpose of sex and what sex is for. Sex is given to human beings to be exercised gloriously, creatively, dynamically, in the context of marriage. Someone says, well, sex is just like a drive for food. No, it's not. A drive for food has to have some parameters. If we would just eat and eat and eat and eat, all of us would weigh 600 pounds and come forward, I'll sign your death certificate. Food has to have parameters. Sex, more than food, has to have parameters, and the parameters for the expression of sex is within the sanctity and the holiness of marriage. And then there's celebration. What is the purpose of marriage? Procreation. We got that. Have children. Have children. Number two, it is for pleasure. Now, some of our church fathers got confused at this point, namely Augustine, namely Aquinas, but it is also for pleasure. I want to debate that. That's pretty clear, isn't it? Also, it is a symbol, a reenactment of the covenant, if you're a Christian, that we have with God in Jesus Christ. Read the Bible, and all the covenants are restated. The covenant God had with Abraham is stated over and over and over again. The covenant of Isaac and Jacob, all the covenants in the Bible are restated to remind us of the relationship and the promises of God. Every time a married couple has sex together, they are restating and reestablishing the covenant they have with God in Christ. It is a sacred covenant event. Just like we go to the Lord's table, the bread and the wine, the cup, it is a restatement of the covenant we have with God in Jesus Christ, in our personal salvation, in his lordship over your life and my life. So it is with sexual intimacy. You see how fabulous this relationship is. And we have totally got it confused. On one extreme, there is the playboy philosophy of anything goes. Hey, anything goes. On the other extreme, there is Plato's philosophy. Oh, sex is evil, doesn't matter. It's on the lower level. This thing about the body is nothing. So one extreme, anything goes. The other extreme, nothing goes. But what is the posture we have as Christians? It is that in marriage there is an openness, and we've already said it. There is a nakedness, and there is no shame. Heard someone say that sex in marriage is like oil in a machine. It keeps all the parts working, and there's no rusting. So, how do we handle sex? The secular world would tell you that males give love in order to get sex. On the other side of the coin, they say females give sex in order to get love. Totally inaccurate. Totally inaccurate. So we come to look to the Bible and get clear instructions as to how this most sacred gift operates. So we open the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. What does that mean? It must mean that this book tells us how to sing the number one song in life in the area of human sexuality. It's the preeminent song, the Song of Songs. So we're talking about, unashamedly, sexual intimacy. The operative word for sexual intimacy is time, T-I-M-E. The operative word for sexual intimacy is, help me, choir, all together. The operative word for sexual intimacy is time. time. So we open the book of Ecclesiastes, and I wish we had the time to read all these passages, but I'm just going to make references to them, and you can go back and check them out because time is important. We're studying 1 Corinthians. You read in 1 Corinthians chapter number 7, a little verse, how in married life there are occasions when sex is not participated in by the husband and wife because that happens only for a time, remember? So we come to Ecclesiastes and we see that sexual intimacy takes time. You read about Solomon. He's attracted to the Shulamite woman, Shula, and Solo, abbreviated names. And Solomon was attracted to her, and in chapter number 1, he describes for us how he saw her, chapter 1. And mine in that day, the body was totally covered, and all he saw was her face. And so in chapter 1, when he saw this Shulamite girl, he describes her face. Man, her eyes, her cheeks, her lips, her necks, that's all he could see. That was the introductory part. That was the first step in time with her. And then there's a little bit about courtship, and then on their wedding night, we move into chapter number 4, he describes more of her body. He describes her eyes, her neck, he describes her breast. You see, there's a development there in intimacy on the wedding night. And then years go by, and you go to chapter 7, he describes his wife, the Shulamite girl, from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet. He starts with her feet and said, boy, your feet sure look, paraphrase, sexual in those sandals. Yeah. So you see, as they were married, their relationship grew and developed from just knowing this part, and knowing all of the body parts of one another. You see, the operative word in sexual intimacy is time. It takes time. And also, the operative word in sexual intimacy is time, but sexual intimacy takes timing. Timing, right? Not going too fast for anybody, am I? Are you with me? You see it in Ecclesiastes. There in chapter number 5, Solomon gets up. He says, man, I feel like making love to Shulamite, and he goes and knocks on the door of her bedroom, and she said, what? And he says, open the door. Man, I want to come and make love to you. Young's paraphrase, it's right there. And Shula says, no, I'm just waking up, and I'm not ready. And she makes a little excuses there. And by the way, there you have a biblical grounds for the headache. Yeah, right there, right in Song of Songs. And she says, no, not right. And then she kind of wakes up. She said, it's unscheduled. It's not the timing. But man, she went and opens the door, and Solomon is left. He's gone. Solomon, come back. Hey, I'm reconsidering here your proposition. We're married. And remember, we've already studied in 1 Corinthians, a very devastating passage. God says, wives, you don't own your bodies any longer. Your husband owns them. Husbands, you don't own your bodies any longer. Your wife owns them. Oh. And so now she gets up and gets dressed, and she's running all over everywhere trying to find Solomon. By the way, the Song of Solomon is an amazing book in a lot of fashions, but it pictures the Shulamite girl seeking to be intimate with her husband more than Solomon is seeking to be intimate with her. It is an aggressive female. Read it. Oh, I've never heard of such a thing. Can you think how that would go off way back there in antiquity? You see, it's a celebration. And it takes timing. Go on the internet, and look up something like the danger of poor timing. And I said, danger of timing, you'd probably get references to something in space that doesn't work and has to come together. Hey, that's what I thought. But you get in there, you know what it takes you to? A BMW. A BMW, according to Ward's Automotive Magazine, which is preeminent, evidently, in the understanding of engines and magazines, for 26 years has said the BMW makes the best engine of any manufacturer of automobiles, BMW. In 26 years, BMW engine has finished number one. Only 2 years, they finished number two. It is the most delicate, tuned engine of anything that's made on the planet, according to this automotive magazine, which is considered to be definitive. And so you look up and you talk about the danger of poor timing, and you read there about how when somebody tinkers with a motor, the slightest bit, the engine of a BMW, you have to go back and get the ignition adjusted, and it has to be retimed. And if this body is the engine God has given to you and me for sexual expression in marriage, timing is very important because it's more intricate than even a BMW engine. What are we saying, folks? With symbol and metaphor, we understand a finely tuned engine. There has to be timing there at the ignition, and that's true in all the lovemaking we have in a marriage relationship. Am I going too fast for anybody? Apply it to yourself. Apply it to your own life. And so, we understand the operative word in sexual intimacy is time. And it takes time and it takes timing. Also, it takes something else. Sexual intimacy requires timely communication. Read this book, and you'll see that Solomon and the Shunammite, they talked all the time. It's just full of talking and conversation. They talked. When they were making love, before they made love, while they made love. Read it, all in between. They're talking, they're communicating. It's important that we communicate, that we do not let things build up in a marriage relationship. And we haven't dealt with this, and we haven't dealt with this, we haven't dealt with this. And there's a verse there in the 2nd chapter of Song of Solomon. Catch the little foxes because they spoil the vines. Great little verse. I thought about that in terms of communication. It's those little bitty irritating things. He just keeps on criticizing. She just keeps on harping. She just keeps on dodging. And those little bitty foxes. In that day in a vineyard, the little foxes would go in and they would go and attack the very roots of the vine that was to produce fruit. They'd attack the roots and they know there would not be any fruit. There would not be any production. That's what happens, ladies and gentlemen, in marriage relationships and families when there's little beep, 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 beep. Well, no big thing. Beep, beep, beep. And but suddenly the roots are attacked and there's no joy and fruition and growth and development in the marriage relationship. Check those little, it takes communication. Communication is very important. What is communication about? How do we communicate? Most of us would say with words, right? We communicate with words. Not really. Only 7% of communication has to do with words. Boy, when I read that and realized it was true, I said, I spent a lot of time with words. I'm a semi-wordsmith. Every week I write out a manuscript, 52 pages. You hope it'll be 32. It's impossible to preach a bad short sermon. People keep reminding me. But I work in words. I do not memorize particularly. It's just the overflow of what I've gotten and what I work. Every Thursday, I write out a manuscript. That's what I do, words. But words are not big. Only 7% of when we communicate with one another has to do with words. Well, that's kind of strange. Kind of strange. 38% have to do with tone of voice. Words. Well, there's a lot left. What's left? You've got words and your tone of voice. Well, there's a lot left in this communication package. 55% has to do with body language and expression. Whoa! Have you ever thought about that? So here we go, and let me prove that to you right now. Let's take the word yes. Why yes? Tone of voice. Yes. Yes. Well, 38%. What's that 55%? Expression. It is yes. Yes. It is yes. Yes. The expression, the smile, that is the 55% of when we try to communicate with one another. All right, let's just show how many steps are involved in communication. Here's a husband who wants to communicate with his wife. This is what he wants to say to his wife. He thinks about what he wants to say, okay? Thinks about, and then he expresses that to his wife, what he wants to say, which is something different than he'd thought about saying, right? Then his wife hears what he says. Then his wife takes what he has said and applies it to her. And then she thinks about what she wants to say back to her husband, okay? And she states it and he hears it and he applies that to himself. And then he thinks about what he wants to say back to her. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 8 steps in just a bam of communication between a husband and wife. You got it? And in any of those steps, there can be all kinds of confusion. With words, a little bit. Tone of voice, bigger. Body language. Body language. 55%. We need to learn how to communicate and don't let those little foxes spoil the vine. If there's going to be sexual intimacy, communication. And then not only sexual intimacy, the operative word is, and then there takes sexual intimacy involved being timely, and then sexual intimacy involved timely communication. And then finally, it takes time away. Yeah. Cut out everything else, shut off computers and phones and activities, and time's away with a husband and a wife. Doesn't matter where you go, how you go, shut the door, get away. Time away. We're talking about sexual intimacy. We're talking about a relationship that is growing and developing, sweeter and better, year by year by year by year. Thrilling thing, don't miss on that. It's exceedingly important, all of this, in having a marriage that Solomon would say sings, having a great marriage. Let's just say, and I could illustrate this, but I'll not, that you were invited to go to a meeting of the top, wealthiest, most successful executives in America. Say there were about 12 people there. And all 12 people were asked to tell the group their secret of success and what they've done. One guy stands up and he said, well, before I was 21 years old, I came from nothing, but I'd made my first $1 million. And now I'm CEO of a company and it's worth da-da-da. Next guy stands up and said, well, I went to school, you know, I got a PhD and I went out and I made this contribution. I won a Nobel Prize. And they give all their stories of success. And this average guy in there, he said, what am I going to say? I'm just average. And he said to those other men, he said, you know, I've been married to a great gal for 32 years. We have 4 super children, 3 girls and a boy, and I love my wife today now more than I did when we got married. Our children, all but one are married, and they have children, and they love the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're faithful, and their lives are full of glory and honor of God. He said, that's my success.